The war had ended, but the battlefield still smelled of blood and ash. Sergeant Alex Carter stood near the edge of the Xal'kar outpost, his boots crunching against the dirt. The silence after months of gunfire and screaming felt unnatural. He had fought in too many battles to believe peace could ever be real. But here he was, watching the remnants of the Xal'kar forces retreat, their insectoid forms moving in eerie unison. The peace treaty was clear: no more fighting, no more killing. And yet, the alien commander had stepped forward with one final gesture: a gift. Two Xal'kar warriors dragged a small figure toward him. The creature struggled weakly, her violet-hued skin smeared with dust, her delicate limbs trembling as she tried and failed to pull away from their grip. Alex's eyes narrowed. He wasn't sure what he was looking at. A child? No, not quite. She was young, but not a child in human terms. Her limbs were slender, her large black eyes wide with pure terror. Her silver-white hair, tangled and matted, framed a face that was utterly alien, yet unmistakably expressive in its fear. The Xal'kar commander spoke in his guttural, clicking voice. "A token of our peace." Alex frowned. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? The alien commander didn't answer, only dipped his head in an eerie bow before turning away. The two warriors released the girl, and without another word, they'd vanished into the retreating masses of their kind. The girl dropped to her knees, shaking. Alex sighed. This was not part of the damn treaty. He glanced at his squad, men and women standing in silent confusion, their expressions ranging from amusement to unease. One of them, Private Dawson, let out a short laugh. "Looks like they gave you a pet, Sarge." Alex shot him a glare, and Dawson quickly shut up. The girl flinched at the sound, pressing herself against the ground, her breath coming in short, ragged bursts. Alex crouched down, trying to get a better look at her. She recoiled, as if expecting a strike. "Hey," he said, voice low but firm. "I'm not gonna hurt you." She didn't respond. Instead, her eyes darted around, her breathing frantic. Alex could recognize that look anywhere: pure, unfiltered terror. He had seen it on prisoners of war, on civilians caught in the crossfire. But this was something deeper. She wasn't just afraid. She thought she was about to die. Something cold twisted in Alex's gut. The Xal'kar had always seen humans as monsters, but he had never thought much about what that really meant. Then the girl whimpered, barely a sound, just a broken breath escaping her lips. His radio crackled to life. "Sergeant Carter, report. What's the situation?" Alex exhaled. "Situation's under control," he said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. A gust of wind blew through the camp, lifting the strands of the girl's silver-white hair. She was so still, so small, yet her entire body was wound tight like a spring, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Then, in a shaking, barely audible voice, she spoke. "Will it be quick?" Alex frowned. "What?" She swallowed hard, her eyes never leaving his hands, his fingers, his nails, as if searching for claws, fangs, weapons. "When you eat me," she whispered, "will it be quick?" Alex stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. Then realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She thought he was going to eat her. For a moment, he didn't know whether to laugh or curse. Instead, he just stared at the terrified alien girl, her trembling form barely holding itself together. And all he could think was, what the hell am I supposed to do now? Alex had seen fear before, on the battlefield, in the eyes of soldiers who knew their time was up. But this was different. This wasn't the fear of an enemy facing defeat or a soldier staring down the barrel of a gun. This was the terror of prey caught in the shadow of a predator. And somehow, in this strange, twisted scenario, he was the predator. The girl remained frozen, her wide black eyes locked onto his every movement. She had barely blinked since the moment she was dumped at his feet. Alex sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. He was a soldier, not a damn babysitter. "Come on," he muttered. She didn't move. With a grunt, he reached for her, intending only to help her stand. But the second his hand came near, she flinched so violently that she nearly toppled over. A strangled whimper escaped her throat, and her entire body curled inward, her arms wrapping around her knees as she squeezed herself into the smallest shape possible. Alex exhaled through his nose. This wasn't working. She wasn't just afraid of him. She was convinced she wouldn't survive the night. "Suit yourself," he said, stepping back and motioning toward the camp. "You stay out here. You'll freeze. You come with me, you won't." She didn't respond. Alex wasn't in the mood to drag her, so he turned and started walking back toward the barracks. He didn't look back, but he listened. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, finally, the softest sound of movement behind him. She was following. Inside the barracks, he grabbed a spare blanket from his bunk and tossed it toward her. She didn't move to catch it, didn't even react as it draped over her knees. She just sat there, arms still wrapped around herself, her breathing shallow. Alex crouched down, watching her carefully. "You got a name?" No response. He sighed and reached for a ration pack, tearing it open. The smell of cooked protein filled the air. Basic military food, nothing special. He placed it between them, then leaned back, waiting. The girl's entire body tensed. Her gaze flicked to the food, then back to him. Her fingers twitched, but she didn't move any closer. Alex frowned. "You gonna eat or what?" Her breath hitched. She thought this was a trap. Realization dawned in his mind. She wasn't just afraid of being eaten. She thought he was feeding her to fatten her up first. Alex let out a frustrated sigh and grabbed a fork, stabbing a piece of the food. Without breaking eye contact, he shoved it into his own mouth and chewed. Slowly, deliberately. The girl flinched again, watching him like a cornered animal. After a long, tense moment, he swallowed and held up his hands. "See, not poison, not a trick, just food." Still, she didn't move. Alex rolled his eyes and stood. "Suit yourself," he muttered, walking toward his bunk. "Starve if you want." He climbed into bed and turned his back to her. If she didn't want to eat, that was her problem. Minutes passed. The room was silent except for the occasional sound of wind against the walls. He kept his breathing slow and steady, pretending to be asleep. Then, ever so softly, he heard movement. He didn't turn, didn't react. A rustle of fabric, a hesitant shuffle. Then the softest, barely there scrape of a fork against plastic. She was eating. Alex smirked to himself but didn't say a word. He closed his eyes, letting exhaustion take him. The war was over, but something told him this was only the beginning of a whole different kind of battle. The night was quiet, save for the occasional murmur of voices from the other barracks and the distant hum of the security drones patrolling the perimeter. Inside the dimly lit room, Alex lay on his bunk, eyes closed but fully awake. He had trained himself to sleep lightly, always aware of his surroundings, always ready for a fight. And right now, something wasn't sitting right. The alien girl hadn't moved for hours. She sat in the corner of the room, barely breathing, her large black eyes reflecting the dull glow of the overhead light. Even though she had finally eaten, the fear had not left her. If anything, it had settled into something even worse, a quiet, desperate kind of terror. Alex had seen prisoners act like this before, back when he was stationed in the outer colonies. Some people fought back, others begged. And then there were the ones who went completely silent, the ones who stopped believing they had a future. She was one of those. He had to be careful. His instincts screamed that something was off. He kept his breathing steady, his body still, pretending to be asleep. If she was planning something, she would wait until she thought he was vulnerable. And then it happened. A whisper of movement, the lightest shift of weight. Alex didn't open his eyes, didn't move, but he felt her creeping toward the door. She was running. He let her get halfway before he bolted upright. "Don't." She froze. Her entire body went rigid, her fingers hovering inches from the door panel. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. Alex swung his legs off the bed, his voice calm but firm. "You leave this room, you set off an alarm. That'll bring the guards, and they won't ask questions." She turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see the panic in her expression. But she didn't lower her hands. She wasn't stopping. Alex stood slowly, hands at his sides, making sure he didn't look like he was reaching for a weapon. "Where do you think you're gonna go?" She swallowed hard, her throat visibly tightening. "Away." "Yeah." He took a step forward. She took one back, pressing herself against the door. "And then what? You think your people are just waiting outside, ready to take you home?" She didn't answer. Alex sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He didn't blame her for trying. Hell, he'd do the same thing if he thought he was about to be eaten. But she didn't understand where she was. "You leave this room," he said. "You won't make it 20 feet before someone puts a bullet in you." She flinched but didn't back down. Her voice trembled. "Then I would rather die trying." Alex exhaled sharply. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. She meant it. She was so convinced that he would kill her, eat her, torture her. Whatever the Xal'kar had told her about humans, it had sunk in deep. So deep that death was a better option than staying here. And that pissed him off. Not at her. At the bastards who had done this to her. He forced himself to calm down. Getting angry wouldn't help. He needed to stop thinking like a soldier and start thinking like someone who had just been handed a terrified alien prisoner who thought he was a monster. "All right," he said, stepping back and raising his hand slightly, showing her he wasn't going to stop her. "You want to leave? Go ahead." She hesitated, confused. "I won't stop you," he continued. "But understand this. Out there, I'm the only one keeping you alive." The words hung in the air. For the first time, doubt flickered in her expression. Alex could see the war going on inside her head. Her instincts screamed at her to run. But something else, something small, buried under layers of fear, was starting to question everything she had been told. He didn't push. He didn't force her to stay. He just waited. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she lowered her hand. She turned away from the door, her shoulders slumping in quiet defeat. Alex let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Good choice," he muttered, walking back toward his bunk. He didn't need to say anything else. She was still terrified. She still didn't trust him. But for the first time, she wasn't trying to run. And that was a start. For the next several days, she barely moved from the corner of the room. Alex had given up trying to talk to her. Every question he asked was met with silence, every attempt at conversation ignored. She didn't trust him. That much was obvious. But at least she had stopped trying to escape. She still flinched whenever he came too close, still tensed whenever he made sudden movements, but she no longer seemed to be bracing for immediate death. That was progress. Slow, painful progress, but progress nonetheless. He made sure she had food. Every meal, he placed a ration pack near her and walked away. He never watched her eat. He didn't need to. Every time he woke up, the food was gone, the empty packaging tucked neatly beside her. She was still scared, but not enough to starve herself anymore. Alex had seen this kind of behavior before. He wasn't a stranger to dealing with prisoners of war, refugees, or terrified civilians caught in the crossfire. Survivors always acted the same. They waited. They studied. They tried to understand what kind of hell they had landed in before deciding their next move. She was studying him. The way she watched him, not openly, but out of the corner of her eye, when she thought he wasn't looking, told him everything he needed to know. She was trying to figure out what kind of monster he was. Alex let her watch. If she wanted to know who he was, she'd find out by seeing what he didn't do. He never raised his voice, never made a move toward her, never locked the door. If she wanted to run, she could, but she didn't, not anymore. Then, one night, he caught her staring at him. Not in fear, not in panic, just watching. He had been cleaning his gear, a habit he never broke, even when there wasn't a mission ahead. The dismantled pieces of his rifle lay spread out on the table, his fingers moving automatically as he wiped down the parts. He felt her eyes on him. Alex didn't acknowledge her at first, didn't turn, didn't react. Instead, he kept working, letting her observe. Finally, after what felt like forever, she spoke. "What is that?" Her voice was quiet, cautious, but it was the first time she had spoken since that night she tried to escape. Alex didn't look up. "It's a rifle." A long pause. Then, "A weapon." "Yeah." She shifted slightly, her fingers curling into the blanket she had taken to wrapping around herself. "Do you use it to kill?" Alex finally met her gaze. She didn't flinch this time. "Yeah," he said simply. "When I have to." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You are a warrior." "Soldier," he corrected. She tilted her head, silver hair catching the dim light. "There is a difference." "Sometimes," Alex muttered. He set a rifle part down and leaned back, folding his arms. "I fight when I have to. But I don't kill for fun, if that's what you're asking." She hesitated, her black eyes searching his face, as if trying to tell if he was lying. "You do not eat them?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Alex exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "No, humans don't eat Xal'kar." She didn't react at first. She just sat there, staring at him like she was trying to process the words. "You think I'm lying?" he asked. She lowered her gaze. "My people said, they said humans take Xal'kar prisoners. They do not return. They disappear." Alex rubbed his jaw. "That's war. People die. Doesn't mean we're eating them." Another long silence. Then she whispered, "Then why am I here?" Alex didn't have an answer for that. He knew why the Xal'kar had given her to him. She was a gift, a token of peace, or maybe just a way to get rid of someone they no longer wanted. He wasn't sure which. But she was looking at him now, really looking at him, as if trying to piece together the truth from his face alone. After a moment, Alex sighed. "I don't know." She seemed startled by his honesty. "You're not a prisoner," he added. "Not to me, anyway." She didn't answer, but something in her posture changed, less tense, less afraid. Alex didn't press the conversation further. He simply continued cleaning his rifle, letting her sit with her thoughts. And for the first time since she had been forced into his care, she didn't look like she was waiting to die. The days blurred together in a quiet, uneasy rhythm. Alex didn't force conversation, and the girl, who still hadn't told him her name, didn't offer much. But something had shifted. She no longer recoiled when he moved, no longer looked at him like he was a beast waiting for the right moment to sink his teeth into her. She still didn't trust him, not completely, not yet, but she was no longer drowning in fear. It was progress. Alex kept things simple. He didn't try to push her into talking, but he made sure she knew she wasn't just something to be left in the corner. He left food for her at mealtimes, kept her warm, and never locked the door. He didn't act like a captor because he wasn't one. One evening, as he finished cleaning his gear, he noticed her watching him again. It had become a habit of hers, silent observation, studying him the way a survivor studies an unfamiliar jungle, searching for signs of danger. This time, though, she wasn't just watching. She was curious. She was staring at the combat knife he had set on the table, her black eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to figure out its purpose. "You ever seen one before?" Alex asked, his voice casual. She flinched at being caught staring, but didn't shrink back like she once would have. Instead, she hesitated before finally shaking her head. Alex picked up the knife and twirled it once between his fingers before setting it down again. "It's a tool," he explained. "Cuts through rope, wires, cloth. And yeah, if I have to, it works as a weapon too." She swallowed. "You do not kill with it. Only when there's no other choice," Alex said simply. She considered his words for a long moment, then surprised him by asking, "And your rifle? That is also a tool?" Alex sighed. "Depends who you ask." The girl tilted her head slightly, a Xal'kar expression he was beginning to recognize as deep thought. She was thinking more now, questioning more. That was good. He pointed to the weapon on the table. This keeps my people alive. It's not about killing. It's about surviving." She frowned, considering that. "Then, are we not the same?" Alex's hand stilled. He hadn't expected that. He studied her, really looked at her, this small, fragile thing who had once been curled in a ball, too terrified to even breathe near him. Now, she was asking real questions. Maybe they were the same. Before he could answer, the door swung open, and a soldier stepped inside. Alex immediately recognized the sharp grin of Private Dawson. Well, Dawson drawled, leaning against the doorway, his gaze flicking between Alex and the girl. "Didn't think you were into keeping pets, Sarge." Alex's jaw tightened. The girl immediately shrank back, her body curling inward at the sight of the newcomer. Dawson noticed and smirked. "Huh, guess she knows her place." "Get out," Alex said, his voice dangerously calm. Dawson's smirk didn't falter. "Relax, I'm just saying." Alex was out of his chair before the private could finish. The movement was fast, controlled, and by the time Dawson realized what had happened, Alex was already in his space, his voice low and deadly. "I said, get out." Dawson stiffened. For a second, he thought about pushing his luck. Then he saw the look in Alex's eyes and wisely decided against it. All right, Dawson muttered, raising his hands in surrender. "Damn. No need to get all defensive over your little pet." Alex clenched his fists, but he let Dawson walk away. The door shut. Silence fell. Alex exhaled, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Idiot," he muttered under his breath. When he turned back to the girl, he expected her to be shaking, maybe even trying to make herself disappear again. Instead, she was staring at him, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. Not even a little. "You?" She hesitated, as if struggling to find the right words. "You did not let him insult me." Alex snorted. "Yeah, well, he's an ass." She blinked, tilting her head again. "An ass." Alex sighed. "Forget it." She was still watching him, something strange in her gaze. Then, for the first time, she said, "My name is Lir'va." Alex stopped. He hadn't expected that. After all this time, all the silence, she had finally given him her name. He gave her a small nod. "Lir'va. Huh." She nodded. "Well," he said, sitting back down, "nice to meet you." And for the first time since she had been forced into his care, Lir'va almost smiled. The peace that had settled between them was fragile, like thin glass, delicate but real. Lir'va still kept her distance, still flinched when voices rose too high, but she no longer looked at Alex like he was some kind of nightmare. She had even started asking questions. Not many. Not often. But she was curious now. She watched him clean his gear, asked about human words she didn't understand. Occasionally, she would even make a quiet remark about how inefficient human technology was, as if she had forgotten she was supposed to fear him. Alex let her talk. He let her adjust at her own pace. He knew trust wasn't something that came easy, not for people who had spent their whole lives told that the enemy would devour them the moment they got too close. For the first time, she was beginning to believe he wasn't a monster. But peace never lasted long in war zones. The alert klaxon shattered the quiet. The sudden blare of noise made Lir'va flinch violently, her hands clamping over her ears. Red warning lights flashed along the walls, the automated voice of the base AI echoing through the barracks. A alert. Base under ATTCK. All units to defensive positions. Alex was already moving, years of instinct kicking in before conscious thought. He grabbed his rifle, strapped on his gear, and reached for his helmet. Then he turned to Lir'va. She was frozen, her black eyes wide, her breath coming in rapid, panicked gasps. The flashing lights painted her violet skin in violent shades of red, making her look even more alien than usual. Alex crouched in front of her. "Lir'va," he said, voice steady, "you need to stay here." She barely reacted. "Hey," he snapped, tapping the side of his helmet. "Stay here. Do not open this door. You hear me?" She looked at him, her gaze unfocused, her mind somewhere else. Alex gritted his teeth. He didn't have time for this. He grabbed a blanket and tossed it toward her. "Cover yourself. Stay quiet. No one touches you but me. Got it?" Lir'va's breath hitched. Then, slowly, she nodded. It was all he could ask for. Then he was gone. The base was chaos. Gunfire erupted in the distance, the sound of heavy weapons shaking the ground. Alex sprinted toward the barricades, his boots pounding against the metal floors. "Report," he barked into his radio. Static. Then, Xal'kar forces came out of nowhere. They're breaching the east sector. Alex cursed. The peace treaty was over. The Xal'kar were attacking. And that meant one thing. Lir'va was in danger. The battle raged around him. Gunfire, explosions, screams. He fought his way through the chaos, his rifle kicking against his shoulder as he put down enemy after enemy. But his mind was somewhere else. Back in the barracks. Back where Lir'va was waiting. If the Xal'kar had attacked this base, they weren't just here to kill. They were here to take back what they thought was theirs. And that meant Lir'va. Alex's blood ran cold. He pushed forward, his mind screaming at him to move faster. He had to get back, had to reach her before. The explosion hit before he heard it. The shockwave sent him sprawling, his helmet smashing against the ground. His vision blurred, ringing filling his ears. He tried to push himself up, but something was wrong. His body wasn't responding the way it should have. Then through the smoke, he saw them. A group of Xal'kar warriors, and they were headed toward the barracks, toward Lir'va. Alex tried to move, tried to force his limbs to cooperate, but pain shot through his skull. He was too late. He had failed. And then, a gunshot. Not human. Not Xal'kar. Something in between. The Xal'kar warriors stumbled, one collapsing to the ground. A hole burned clean through his carapace. Then Lir'va stepped out of the smoke. She held his sidearm in her hands, her fingers tight around the grip. The weapon looked too big, too heavy for her, but she held it steady. She was shaking, but her aim was true. The remaining Xal'kar warriors hesitated, shocked to see one of their own standing against them. Then, in a voice that was stronger than Alex had ever heard from her, she said, "Stay away from him." And for the first time, Alex realized, Lir'va wasn't just some terrified girl anymore. She had made her choice. The battlefield was chaos, but in that moment, everything slowed. Lir'va stood in front of Alex, her grip tight on the human weapon, her slender hands trembling but firm. The Xal'kar warriors hesitated, confusion flickering across their faces. Their own kind standing against them. It wasn't just unthinkable, it was a betrayal. Alex barely managed to push himself upright, his head still spinning from the explosion. His ears rang, his body ached, but he didn't take his eyes off her. Lir'va wasn't running. She wasn't cowering. She was standing her ground. The leader of the Xal'kar, a warrior taller than the others, clicked his mandibles in mourning. Lir'va, he growled in their guttural language. Step aside. You do not belong with them. Lir'va's fingers twitched around the trigger. She understood his words, but her stance did not waver. He is not my enemy. The warrior's mandibles flared in what could have been disgust. You were given to them. As a peace offering, you are nothing to them. Lir'va didn't look away. Then why did he protect me? The warrior let out a low, reverberating growl, his patience fraying. You are Xal'kar. We do not betray our own. For the first time, Lir'va's voice didn't shake. Then why did you give me away? The words cut through the battlefield like a blade. Even Alex felt the weight of them. The warrior hesitated. Lir'va swallowed hard, but she held her ground. Her voice was softer when she spoke again, but no less firm. You cast me aside like I was nothing. But she glanced back at Alex, then turned back to face them. He treated me like I mattered. Alex's breath caught in his throat. Something flickered in the warrior's expression, something dangerous. The kind of anger that only came when someone was faced with a truth they didn't want to hear. We will not leave you here, the warrior hissed. Then I will not go with you, Lir'va said. The other Xal'kar warriors shifted uneasily. They had come expecting a fight, but they had not expected this. Alex clenched his teeth. He had no idea how this was going to end, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them take her. He forced himself to his feet, despite the way his body screamed in protest. His rifle was still strapped to his back, but he could barely lift it. He wasn't sure if he could even get a shot off before they reached him. But he didn't have to. Because before the Xal'kar could make their move, the reinforcements arrived. The distant roar of engines filled the air. The ground trembled as armored carriers rolled in, human soldiers pouring out, weapons raised. The Xal'kar warriors immediately went on the defensive. The battle was over. Alex could see it in their eyes, the realization that they were outnumbered, outgunned. The leader hissed in frustration, his mandibles clenching tight. This is not over, he spat. Lir'va lowered the weapon, but her stance remained firm. I know. The Xal'kar warriors retreated, vanishing into the smoke and rubble. They would be back. But for now, the fight was over. Alex let out a slow breath, then turned to Lir'va. She still had the gun in her hands, though her fingers were white-knuckled around the grip. Her whole body trembled, the adrenaline crashing through her system, now that the immediate danger had passed. She had stood up to her own people. She had chosen to fight. For him. For herself. For the first time since she had been thrown into his care, she had made a choice that was entirely her own. Alex stepped forward, carefully reaching out. Lir'va. She blinked up at him, startled, as if she had forgotten he was there. He held out his hand. You did good. Lir'va hesitated. Then, slowly, she placed the gun into his palm. For the first time, her hands weren't shaking. Alex nodded. Let's go home. She swallowed hard, then gave a small, hesitant nod. The war wasn't over. The Xal'kar would come again. But this time, Lir'va wouldn't be running. She had found something worth fighting for, and she wasn't about to let it go.